Chapter 1. The fall of Delirious. The smell of iron and fire choked the air. Valsinium burned. Delirious sprinted through the narrow stone alleys of his village, eyes stinging from smoke, ears ringing with screams. Roman soldiers swarmed the town like a plague. Their segmented armor gleamed red in the firelight, swords slashing down anything that moved, man, woman, child. He turned a corner and found his wife, Livia, clutching their son, Timo, beneath the crumbled arch of the town's watchtower. Blood streaked her temple. Timo sobbed quietly in her arms. "Run," Delirious rasped, grabbing her hand. "We have." Two arrows whistled past, one burying into the stone above his head. Roman auxilia burst into the alley. Delirious swung his workman's hammer, connecting with a soldier's jaw with a wet crunch. He grabbed Livia's arm, but it was too late. A javelin struck her in the back, driving clean through. She fell forward with a sound Delirious would never forget. "No, no," he howled. Timo screamed. Delirious lunged to shield him, but a blow from behind knocked him to the ground. The last thing he saw was his son's eyes, wide with fear, as two soldiers tore him away. Darkness followed. He woke days later in a wagon of chains. Around him were 30 others, some injured, some weeping, most silent. The iron collar on his neck burned like a brand. His hands were bound and his legs shackled to the wooden floor. They traveled for weeks, guarded day and night, south toward Capua. Delirious learned little except that his wife was dead, his village razed, and his son taken, sold, or worse. When they finally arrived at the gates of the Ludus of Batiatus, he saw for the first time the place that would birth a rebellion. The Ludus was a fortress of stone and blood. Slaves were driven like cattle into the training yard. Above them, on a balcony, stood the Lanista Lentulus Batiatus, a man with the eyes of a vulture. "Welcome to hell," a gruff voice said. Delirious turned. A tall, powerfully built man with a scar across his lip looked him up and down. "I'm Crixus. If you're lucky, you'll die quick. If not, maybe you'll survive long enough to matter." That night, Delirious was stripped and shaved, fed slop, and thrown into a stone cell. The stench of sweat, blood, and rot filled the air. All around, broken men groaned in the dark. Morning came with violence. A horn blared and they were dragged into the training yard, where wooden weapons were tossed at their feet. Men were already striking at dummies, at each other, and at the air, watched by whip-wielding trainers. One man stood apart, a dark-eyed Thracian with arms like iron and a quiet intensity that silenced the yard, Spartacus. When Delirious took up a sword for the first time, it felt like holding lightning. But he was slow, raw, angry, sloppy. He lunged wildly at a padded dummy, only to be struck behind the knee by a wooden staff. "Dead," said Crixus, walking around him. "You hold that blade like a blacksmith's son. Fight like one and you'll join your wife soon." Delirious flinched. "Don't you speak of her." The wooden staff smacked his temple. He collapsed dizzy. "You think rage is enough?" Crixus growled, kneeling beside him. "It is. You want vengeance, then learn or die." That night Spartacus approached him in the cells, offering a strip of cloth to bind his wounds. "You hesitate," he said. "Hesitation kills faster than steel." "I'm no fighter," Delirious muttered. "You are now," Spartacus replied. "And if your blood still burns, I will make you one." Over the following weeks, Delirious endured a crucible. Crixus drilled him until his hands bled. He taught him the rhythm of war, how to move with a blade, when to feint, how to kill quickly and without remorse. "Always ended in one stroke," he said. "Mercy is for Romans." Spartacus trained him in control. "Feel your enemy's breath," he would say. "Let him strike first, then on the next moment." They sparred in silence, each motion precise, deadly. At night, Delirious collapsed in his cell, muscles screaming, haunted by dreams of his wife's scream and Timo's terrified face. But each morning he rose with sharper eyes. One day, during a demonstration for wealthy Roman guests, a seasoned gladiator lost control and lunged at a noble. The guards froze. Delirious didn't. He tackled the gladiator mid-swing, saving the Roman's life. The noble laughed in surprise while Batiatus clapped. "A promising one," the Lanista said. "We'll see if he lives long enough to be useful." Later, as the yard emptied, Crixus pulled Delirious aside. "You fight with your heart now," he said. "That's good. But when the time comes, you must learn to fight for others too." Delirious nodded. "What time?" he asked. Crixus looked over his shoulder at Spartacus, who stood in the shadows watching them both. "The time we break our chains." Chapter 2, Blood and Sand. The day began with silence, as it always did before the arena. Delirious stood in the gladiators' tunnel beneath the great amphitheater of Capua. Above him, thousands of Roman voices roared with anticipation, their hunger for violence thick in the air. He tried to still his trembling hands, but they betrayed him. "Breathe," said Crixus beside him, tightening his gauntlets. "The first kill is the hardest. After that, it becomes survival." Spartacus, sharpening his curved cica, said nothing. His eyes were fixed forward, jaw clenched like a man walking into a storm he'd seen before. A gate creaked open ahead, letting in a blinding shaft of sunlight. The guards barked orders, and the first group of slaves was shoved out into the sand. Delirious's name was called. He stepped forward. The heat hit like a hammer. The sun blazed above the stands, baking the arena floor. Across from him stood a veteran gladiator, Cassian, a brute of a man whose left cheek bore a jagged scar and whose axe looked like it weighed more than Delirius's entire body. Cassian grinned, twirling the axe once before pointing it toward Delirius. "The new lamb," he said. "Let's see if he bleats." A horn sounded. Cassian charged. Delirius barely dodged the first strike, an overhead swing that shattered the ground where he'd just been standing. Instinct screamed at him to run. He danced back, gripping his gladius tightly, his body tense, his training blurring in his mind. Cassian came again, this time feinting high and swinging low. The blade scraped Delirius's thigh. Blood bloomed, pain flashed, but Crixus's voice rang in his mind. "Don't retreat, move, take the next breath from him." He stepped inside the next blow, turned his shoulder and plunged his sword into Cassian's ribs. It was not clean. It was not graceful, but it was fatal. Cassian staggered backward, eyes wide, and fell to his knees. The crowd fell silent for a breath, then erupted. Delirius stood over the corpse, chest heaving, face spattered with blood. He didn't feel victorious. He felt sick. Later in the cells, Spartacus sat beside him, offering water. "You hesitated," he said. "I killed him," Delirius replied. "You survived," Spartacus corrected. "But next time you won't have the luxury of being shocked by death. Death is the only coin we have to spend." Weeks that followed, Delirius's name began to echo in the barracks. Not for his finesse, but for his tenacity. He trained harder, fought smarter. Under the sharp eyes of Crixus and Spartacus, he was honed like a blade. One night in the dark of the cells, the first whispers came. "There's talk," said Nasir, a Syrian tactician who had once served in a rebel militia, "of a plan of escape." Delirius turned to face him. "Who leads it?" he asked. "Who else?" Nasir smiled grimly. "The Thracian." The next morning after drills, Spartacus pulled Delirius aside. They stood by the weapon racks, pretending to spar. "If we strike, it will be fast," Spartacus said under his breath. "We have allies. Galen can poison the guards' wine. Myra has hidden knives in the grain stores." Delirius blinked. "You trust me with this?" "I trust your hatred," Spartacus said. "It burns hotter than most." Crixus approached. "You're part of this now," he growled. "No turning back. When the time comes, you'll be at the east gate. You kill the watchman, quickly, quietly. And if we fail, then we die as slaves," Spartacus said, "but we die free." The night came under the cover of a summer storm. Thunder rolled over Capua as rain soaked the sand. The guards drank and played dice, unaware that the wine had been laced with a sleep tonic, courtesy of Galen, who smiled from his cell as the first slumped forward. Myra moved like shadow through the grain storage, retrieving daggers and passing them into waiting hands. Crixus paced like a caged lion, nodding once to Spartacus. It was time. Delirius moved to the east gate. He found the watchman snoring beneath a canvas awning. One quick stab to the neck. The body dropped soundlessly. He opened the gate. Crixus led the charge, slitting throats and cracking skulls with a stolen hammer. Spartacus cut down a captain with a strike so fierce it split helm and skull alike. Fires erupted across the ludus as torches were flung into wooden halls. The slaves, 70 in number, poured into the night, weapons in hand. Capua burned behind them. Delirius stood on a hill above the ludus, watching flames rise into the clouds. Spartacus approached, his chest soaked with blood and rain. "This is the beginning," he said. Delirious turned to him, eyes burning. "I want to find my son," he said. Spartacus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we tear Rome apart until he is found." Chapter 3. The wolves of Vesuvius. The wind howled like a wounded god over the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. Ash and mist clung to the air. The mountain brooded above the Italian plains like a sleeping beast, jagged ridges hiding the smoke of campfires. Delirious stood at the edge of a cliff, staring down into the valley below. Far beneath, Roman banners swayed. Legionaries marched, hundreds of them, spears, shields. Order. Glaber, a praetor of Rome, had them surrounded. He'd come to crush the rebellion quickly before it spread, before it became something more than a spark. But Delirious had fire in his blood now. Behind him, the rebel camp buzzed with movement. Hundreds of former slaves, now soldiers, trained, cooked, sharpened weapons, and mended armor. Some were warriors, most were not. Farmers, bakers, shepherds, prostitutes. But all had something the Romans didn't, a reason to fight. Spartacus walked through the camp like a commander born of war. His presence commanded silence. Delirious followed him, watching him speak with groups of men, reminding them that they were no longer chattel, no longer forgotten. Each word was a blade cutting deeper into their hearts. "Today we bleed for each other," Spartacus said. "Tomorrow, Rome bleeds for us." Crixus trained the new recruits in brutal fashion. He beat men into shape, broke their bones, rebuilt their will. Delirious stood beside him, overseeing drills, correcting sword technique, reinforcing shields. His movements were sharper now, his instincts honed. He'd bled beside Spartacus, earned the respect of Crixus, and begun to command men of his own. That night around the fire, he sat with Nasir and Galen, Myra on the other side sharpening her spearhead. "They have us surrounded," Nasir said grimly, pointing to a rough map scratched into the dirt with a dagger. "Glaber blocks the base of the mountain. They'll starve us out." "We'll die in this pit like rats," Myra muttered. The men whisper fear. "Let them," Crixus growled. "Fear keeps the foolish from rushing to death." Delirious frowned at the map. "Is there another way down the mountain?" "There's no road," Galen said. "Only cliffs." Spartacus approached the fire then, staring into the flames as if listening to something no one else could hear. "There's always another way," he said. That night Spartacus assembled a team: Delirious, Myra, Nasir, 6 others. He led them to the steepest side of the mountain where the cliffs dropped hundreds of feet to the forest floor below. "We'll lower ropes," he said. "Silent, hidden, we descend like wolves." Delirious looked down the cliff face, jagged, narrow, slick with mist. "Wolves with death wishes," he muttered. Spartacus smiled for the first time in days. "I thought you were no fighter," he said. "I'm not," Delirious replied, tying rope around his waist. "I'm a father," Spartacus nodded solemnly. "Then fight like one." The descent was madness. Under cover of darkness, in silence broken only by the whistle of wind, they lowered themselves down the cliffs. Fingers scraped stone. Feet searched blindly. One man lost his grip, his scream cut short by the rocks below. They landed in the forest just before dawn. Like ghosts, they spread out. Delirious led his group through the trees, creeping up on the Roman sentries. One guard turned too late. Delirious's blade slid across his throat like a whisper. They hit Glaber's camp from behind. Tents went up in flame. Men screamed in confusion. Rebels burst from the trees like wolves unleashed, slashing through half-dressed legionaries. Crixus roared into the fray with a 2-handed blade, cleaving through lines like a thunderbolt. Spartacus fought near Delirious, spinning like a storm, his curved blade opening red arcs with each motion. By sunrise, the Roman camp was in chaos. Horses bolted. Supplies burned. Glaber escaped with a handful of soldiers, humiliated. The rebels vanished into the trees before the main force could regroup, disappearing back into the mountain. They had turned entrapment into triumph. In the days that followed, Delirious became something more than a rebel. He was called captain by men who'd once barely known his name. Crixus clapped his shoulder. Spartacus trusted him with raids, but not everything could be won by fire and blade. Myra had been wounded in the escape, her side pierced by a Roman pilum. Infection set in quickly. Galen did all he could, but the wound festered. Delirious sat beside her tent for 3 days, rarely sleeping. "You should be with the others," Myra whispered one night, "preparing." I'm right where I should be, Delirious said. You fight like you're already dead. I am if I lose you, she smiled faintly. Then don't. She died in the early hours before dawn. Delirious buried her himself beneath a black oak at the base of the mountain. No grave marker, no name, only a strip of her red sash tied to a branch. Spartacus found him there later. She died free, he said. Delirious didn't look up. Not free enough. She believed in this, Spartacus said. So do you, that's why you're still breathing. He held out a spear. There's more to be done. Delirious stood, eyes blazing. Then let's burn the world. Chapter 4 Fractures in Fire. The rebellion had become an inferno. Months passed and the countryside burned. Roman villas lay gutted. Slave chains melted in bonfires. The name of Spartacus spread like thunder across the peninsula. His army swelled from hundreds to thousands: Gauls, Thracians, Greeks, Syrians, Africans. Escaped miners, gladiators, shepherds. They followed him not because he promised victory, but because he offered freedom. And yet with each victory, Delirious saw something else rising beneath the surface: division. They struck a Roman supply convoy on the road to Beneventum. Delirious led the charge. The fight was brutal, short. His sword slid between a centurion's ribs. He kicked another into the wheel of a cart, where Crixus split the man's skull with a war hammer. Nasir took a javelin to the leg but kept fighting, roaring in pain as he dragged his blade down a screaming soldier's back. When it was over, the rebels looted the wagons. Gold, grain, fine wine, silk. Some rebels drank, others laughed. Delirious wiped his blade clean. "This is a distraction," he said to Crixus, watching the revelers. "They celebrate like we've won." Crixus spat blood onto the road. "Let them, tomorrow we march again." But Delirious could see it. The rebellion was beginning to rot at the edges. Freedom had come too fast, and many didn't know what to do with it. That night the leaders gathered around a fire. Spartacus stood with arms crossed, staring at the map carved into the dirt. "We must head north," he said, "across the Alps, into Gaul. Escape Roman soil." "We should strike Rome," said Crixus. "The beast is weak, wounded. We have over 10,000 men. If we move fast, we'll be slaughtered," Spartacus interrupted. "They'll bring more legions. We're not ready." "You mean you're not ready?" Crixus growled. "You'd run and hide across the Alps while our blades still burn." The silence was thick. Delirious stepped forward. "Rome will not fall from one blow," he said. "But if we leave now, we may never come back." Spartacus turned to him. "What would you do, Delirious?" He hesitated. He thought of Timo, his son, still lost somewhere in the empire. "I would tear down their gates with my bare hands," Delirious said. "But only when the storm is ready." Crixus shook his head. "You've grown cautious, brother. I've learned that anger alone doesn't win wars." Crixus stepped away from the fire, face twisted in frustration. "My Gauls will march south," he said. "We'll light a fire they cannot ignore." "Then you do so without me," Spartacus replied, voice low. There was no more shouting. The line had been drawn. Crixus left 2 nights later with nearly a third of the army. Delirious stood beside Spartacus, watching torches snake away into the forest. "He's going to die," Delirious muttered. Spartacus nodded. "But he'll die his way." Weeks later, news came like a dagger to the heart. Crixus was dead, ambushed by Crassus's legion, his men butchered near the river Silarus. His body was paraded through the streets, head on a pike. The camp fell into silence when the word reached them. Spartacus stood before the men, his voice rough with grief. "Crixus was our brother," he said, "a man of fire and fury. Rome thinks his death will break us. But they will learn this truth. His spirit lives in every strike we deal, every Roman we send to the grave." Delirious turned away before the speech ended. He couldn't stay. Not for this. That night he sat alone outside his tent, sharpening his blade. Nasir approached quietly. "He was like a brother to you," Nasir said. Delirious nodded. "He taught me how to kill, how to hate, and how to die." They were silent a while. Then Nasir said, "We captured a Roman patrol near Nola. One of them says he knows where your son is." Delirious's blood froze. He stood slowly, sword in hand. "Where is he?" "In Rome," Nasir said. "Owned by a senator named Quintus Levinus. Timo was bought at auction. He serves as a page, a house slave." Delirious clenched his fists. Rome, of course. Spartacus would not turn south, not now, not yet, but he would. Delirious would make him, or he would go alone. He found Spartacus that night at the edge of camp overlooking the plains. "My son is in Rome," Delirious said. Spartacus nodded slowly. "I know. You knew?" "I suspected. I waited until I was sure. I need to go after him." "You will," Spartacus said, "but not alone." Delirious frowned. "What do you mean?" Spartacus turned to face him, eyes like coals. "We go to Rome, Delirious, all of us." The wind whipped through the grass. "You said we weren't ready." "We're not, but they won't let us leave Italy. Crassus is coming, Pompey is coming, the net is closing, so if we're to die," he stepped forward, "then we'll die where they fear us most, on Roman soil, at their gates, with fire." Chapter 5. The ashes of Rome. The wind off the Tiber carried the scent of iron and ash. Rome, eternal, cruel, unshaken, loomed in the distance, its golden temples and blood-stained stones glinting in the afternoon sun. Delirious stood on a ridge just outside the city, eyes locked on the distant sprawl of towers and domes. His fists clenched. His son was somewhere in that city, and nothing would stop him now. Behind him, the rebel army stirred. They had marched north, bled through a dozen skirmishes, crushed legions and slipped traps, but this was the end, their last stand. Thousands of freed slaves camped in the hills, scarred, hardened, proud. Spartacus walked among them like a general of ghosts. "They will say we were mad," he said aloud as he stood on a broken pillar. "They will say we were foolish, but they will never say we were slaves." Cheers rose from the rebels. Delirious didn't cheer. He knelt at a pile of stones, tying a red strip of cloth Myra's around his wrist. He thought of Crixus, of Galen, of the hundreds who died along the way. He thought of his son. He stood, and he drew his sword. That night they descended like fire. Spartacus led the charge at the Appian Gate. Roman soldiers scrambled as the rebels struck, overwhelming the outer guard posts. Delirious and Nasir broke through the perimeter with a company of Gauls, fighting in tight phalanx until the streets turned slick with blood. The rebellion was at the very doorstep of Rome, but Rome did not flinch. Trumpets blared from the southern hills. Crassus, his legions thundered across the fields like a black tide, rows upon rows of armored precision. Cold, professional, unyielding, the trap had closed. The rebels were pinned between Rome and Crassus's army. The fighting stretched into the night. Delirious fought like a demon. He cut down one legionary, then another. Blood painted his chest. He pushed toward the city's edge, toward the villa of Senator Quintus Levinus. A Roman officer tried to stop him. Delirious slammed him into a wall and stabbed until the body went still. He reached the villa. It burned. Rebels had torched it during the chaos. Smoke curled from the marble columns. Delirious stumbled through fire and rubble, bellowing, "Timo." A voice called from within, small, coughing. "Father," he turned, heart twisting. There, a young boy no more than 12, his face smudged with soot, eyes wide with disbelief. "Timo." Delirious dropped his sword and ran to him, falling to his knees and pulling the boy into his arms. "I found you," he whispered, voice breaking. "I waited," Timo said softly. "I knew you'd come." He picked his son up, holding him tight, and turned to flee, only to be met by Roman steel. A squad surrounded them. One soldier raised his gladius. Delirious covered Timo with his body. Then arrows flew. Nasir and a dozen rebels surged in, driving the Romans back. Nasir's face was smeared with ash and blood, but he grinned like a madman. "Thought I'd let you die alone," he shouted. Delirious smiled through the pain. "Not yet." Elsewhere, Spartacus stood bleeding on a hilltop, surrounded by the corpses of Romans and friends alike. His blade was chipped. His breath ragged. Crassus's banner crested the ridge. Spartacus, unbroken, roared into the wind. He charged alone. Dozens came to meet him. He fell, but only when the sun rose. The rebellion was crushed. Thousands were captured. 6,000 were crucified along the Appian Way, a line of death that stretched for miles. Rome had made its statement, but not all died. 1 month later, in the hills of Bruttium, beneath a crumbling aqueduct, a small band of survivors huddled in the shadows. Among them, Delirious and Timo. The boy slept beside the fire. Delirious sat awake, blade in hand, eyes always scanning the dark. Nasir emerged from the woods with bread and smoked meat. "They still look for us," he said. "They always will," Delirious replied. He looked down at his son, then toward the horizon. "What will we do?" Nasir asked. Delirious stood slowly. "We build a new fire," he said, "for the next rebellion." Nasir smirked. Still dreaming of breaking Rome, Delirious looked to the stars above. No, he said, now I dream of raising a son who never has to. Chapter 6 Fires That Never Die. The cave overlooked a green valley where wild horses ran free. The Roman roads were far behind them now, lost behind miles of forest and broken hills. Smoke no longer curled from rooftops. The swords were sheathed, for now. Delirious sat at the cave mouth, sharpening his blade slowly. It was old and nicked now, a relic of blood and rebellion. Beside him, young Tartaros, freshly 13, stared into the fire, holding a wooden spear his father had carved from ashwood. The boy broke the silence. "Did you really fight the Romans in the sand?" Delirious smiled faintly. "I did, in Capua, in an arena made of bones and gold. Thousands screamed for blood. Did you win?" "Once, that's why I'm still breathing." Tartaros poked the fire with a stick. "Tell me again about Spartacus and Crixus." Delirious leaned back against the rock wall, eyes far away now, wandering through flame and time. Spartacus wasn't just a man, he was storm and steel. He taught us we weren't property, that we could rise. Tartaros listened, wide-eyed. "We fled that hell together. He and Crixus and I, they trained me like a brother. I couldn't swing a sword before I met them. I was just a father who'd lost his son." "You found me," the boy said. Delirious nodded. "But I lost many others, Myra, Galen, Nasir's leg, Crixus." His voice trailed off. Tartaros leaned in. "How did he die?" Delirious's gaze grew hard. "He chose his death, refused to run, marched south to strike fear into Rome's heart. They sent 10,000 to stop him." "Did they?" "They stopped him," Delirious said quietly, "but they never forgot him." He looked at the boy. "Neither will I." Tartaros was quiet a long while. "And Spartacus?" Delirious chuckled. "He once held his own arena, you know. When we captured Roman nobles, he forced them to fight each other, stripped them of their armor, made them fight like we had to, in chains, in sand, for their lives." "Did the crowd cheer?" "No," he paused. "They wept because for the first time they understood." Tartaros stared into the fire. "Was he a good man?" "The best I ever knew," Delirious said. "He didn't fight for gold or power. He fought so no one would ever be bought again." Tartaros leaned his head on his father's shoulder. "Do you think there will be another Spartacus one day?" Delirious smiled, kissed the boy's head. "There doesn't need to be, there's you." The next morning they left the cave. They walked south through fields untamed and hills unwatched. They didn't hide anymore. Tartaros carried a satchel of herbs. Delirious carried his sword across his back. At a stream they stopped to drink. "Where are we going?" Tartaros asked. Delirious looked to the rising sun. "To build something, maybe a village, maybe a school. A place where children learn to shape words before they shape swords." The boy grinned. "And if Rome finds us," Delirious unsheathed his old blade, still sharp, "then we remind them we remember." Epilogue. Years passed. Tartaros grew strong, learned from his father, built with his hands, loved with his whole heart. He became a teacher, a builder, a quiet man with fire in his eyes. He told stories by firelight, of slaves who rose, of a Thracian storm named Spartacus, of a Gaul who died roaring, of a woman with a red sash, of a man who fought not for glory but for his son. And long after empires fell and stones turned to dust, the stories endured. Because freedom, once kindled, never truly dies. The end in memory of those who refuse to kneel.